Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to part 7 of Let's Create a Trading Card Game. I do apologize for the slight delay since the last video. I kind of got in a bit of a rut slash confusion of where I wanted the game to go, and so instead of just making videos rambling about my unmade decisions, I decided to just wait and hopefully I'd figure out the decisions and then I could come back to you guys with actual information that could actually help you. And luckily, after about 5 months, I'm getting pretty close, I think, to getting the game to a good testable place where other people can test it, I mean. I have some prototypes of the game as it is currently up on the screen here. And yeah, today I just wanted to talk about card balance because once you reach the point where you find that your rules are 80 to 90% set, then you can start kind of looking at, okay, these cards that I made that I tested with, I just kind of gave them abilities, I gave them card stats, and now I'm seeing that some are way better than others. Like some you just want to play every time you have them, and in a healthy game, you don't really want such momentous cards to be able to be played without the necessary cost, and that's where card balance comes into play. So if you have a game with a mana curve, which many games do, I would probably say most TCGs have some type of mana or energy that they get, and it's usually at a once per turn increment. Magic and Hearthstone, are the two most obvious ones. We got the One Piece card game as well, Dragon Ball Super. But yeah, the theory behind that is as you get more mana, you're able to play more powerful cards on a sort of curve like this. And it just gives you more options, and as the game goes on, you're able to do more things. And even if you don't have a mana curve, you will have some sort of cost. So you want to ensure that the cost you're paying is a fair cost for the outcome you're receiving. And that can be tricky for a lot of reasons, especially if you're not as mathematically minded. But even if you are, it can be tough to kind of conceptualize certain effects or abilities and turn that into direct numbers, and we'll go over that a little later. But continuing on, my card game, current name, Champions Rising. It's kind of long-winded, so I'm not sure if I want to change it or not. I just got to think of something better pretty much, but my game does not have numbered costs to play my cards. So I decided to look at games that didn't have that as well to try to see if I could do something similar. So one thing I found in my research that was really interesting was the Flesh and Blood's Rule of 8. I haven't personally played Flesh and Blood. I've been wanting to, but I just haven't had the means to, basically. I don't really know anyone who plays it, and until I can convince a friend to buy a trial deck with me, I am out of luck, unfortunately. But from my understanding, Flesh and Blood cards have 4 stats in each corner of the card, and the Rule of 8 basically means that if you add up the pitch cost in the top left, the power in the bottom left, and the defense in the bottom right, and subtract that total by the play cost in the top right, then you will get to about 8. And many cards follow this, some cards don't, but that would be because they have a certain effect that would either bump up that number or decrease that number. So far I've only seen decrease that number, but Um, I'm sure it applies both ways. And I thought this was really cool, just kind of in my mind, originally a simple way to make sure all my cards are balanced. Make sure that if all my cards add up to this one number, it will of course be balanced, right? How could you go wrong? Well, there's a lot more nuance to it. I quickly learned, and part of why Flesh and Blood's rule works so well is because every card is played and then it's discarded. And that is why the rule of 8 works so perfectly for it, is because I wasn't considering in my mind that when I play a card on the field, um, it's there and it will stay there until my opponent or I decide to get rid of it. That's how Champions Rising works currently, and so depending on the longevity of the card, that will definitely skew certain stats more in favor than other stats. So while I did incorporate some version of the rule of 8 into Champions Rising, I needed to look elsewhere just to make sure that I was fully balancing the cards on my field. So then I went to my favorite game of all time, Cardfight Vanguard. I have some examples up here. Cardfight Vanguard goes from a grade 0 to grade 3, and then there's also grade 4s and 5s, but for most intents and purposes, for most decks, from when the game started, we can just say 0 through 3 is a good place to kind of wrap your head around it. And you have some increments here of where 0 start at 5 power on the bottom left, and then grade 1's 8, grades 2's 10, and grade 3's at 11. But there are a lot of cards that have their power shifted slightly. When the game started, most grade 1s and 2s were 7k and 9k respectively because they had effects, and only the vanillas had these highest forms of power, and they were played for a few years after the start of the game. Nowadays, no one would ever play a vanilla, but back then they had their value. And nowadays, actually, for the past, I want to say like 6 or more years, Vanguard kind of went away with nerfing the power of the card because of the effect, and except in very rare cases, most grade 2s are 10k and most grade 1s are 8k, even if they have multiple effects that do amazing things. And the other stat that you might have noticed is the shield icon in the middle-ish left of the card. And what's interesting is you can see that the grade 0, which is the weakest of them, has the highest shield. And grade 1s and 2s have 5, and grade 3s actually don't have any shield. And this was something that I thought was really cool. It's because your grade 3s are strongest on the field, but they're weakest when blocking or when guarding. And grade 0s are exactly the opposite. They're perfect for guarding, but they're not the best on the field. And since Champions Rising has a guarding type ability called blocking, which is very similar, I decided to incorporate some of that into my game, where some of the weaker power cards have a more defensive ability, and cards that have higher offense have a weaker defense. So taking all this knowledge, I decided to bring it back to Champions Rising. And in Champions, you have 3 stats. You have your power, you have your armor, and you have your break value. And break is another concept that was inspired by Vanguard. It was inspired by Vanguard's drive checks, where you take the top card of your deck and you reveal it, and if there's some added bonus, you activate it, and then it goes to your hand. So in Champions Rising, breaks are in the top right corner in that diamond, and when they are revealed, you add whatever number is there to the power of the attacking unit, and then the card goes to your hand. So when you're looking at these three stats, you have to keep in mind that if it's played on the field, the 5 and the 4, so the power and the armor, they will be relevant on the field, possibly for many turns, while the break is a one-time use effect. So you have to incorporate that when you're thinking about how to balance the card exactly. This card here, Shadow Scouts, is a melee card because there's a sword in the top left, but if it was a bow and arrow in the top left, it'd be a ranged card, and that would also be accounted for in the current balancing rules that I have. So if a card is ranged, it has a +2 to its count, basically. So overall, the card will have 2 less stats than a melee unit. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to give an example. So here we can look at Shadow Scout's effect. Once per turn, when your opponent's unit is returned to their hand, you can stock flip 1, which means flip one of your stock face down, and then you get to draw a card. So when you're looking at an effect like this, you say, okay, so you are drawing a card, and I've put a value on drawing a card, so that's no problem. And the cost is to flip one stock face down. And I've also come up with a value for that, so no worries there. But then I look at when your opponent's unit is returned to their hand. And that is something that can only happen with an effect. So it needs to be comboed with another card. And when you're thinking of that, there's not a clear number value you can just put on that. You can't just say, oh, yep, that's a 3, that's a 4, you know. So, and then when you're thinking about combos with certain cards, the value could go up or down. You know, the cost for certain cards for returning cards of hand would be greater or less than other cards based on their other stats. So in certain cases, there is no clear, obvious answer. And when you start really trying to balance out cards, you realize that this comes up more often than it doesn't, which is a little intimidating when you're trying to make sure every card is balanced and fair. But at the end of the day, some effects just can't easily translate, and in order to make sure that your game is as balanced as possible, you just have to play test the heck out of it. And that is where I'm at currently, and that's where every game designer eventually has to go back to. But hopefully these little tips that I talked about, hopefully they give you an idea. Hopefully you can start trying to balance your game once you have the rules nearly done, and then it'll give you an idea of where to go forward so you don't start your game horribly imbalanced. One last thing I wanted to ask of you, the audience, is I said I was tinkering around with the physical layout of the card, the visual design. This card is all black and white, and it's not totally up to date with the current, but I just thought it was a good example, so I threw it up here. But for the current design, I wanted to ask your opinion. So up here we have 2 options for the Armor Tough card. And I was just wondering, what do you think is more visually appealing? I know I accidentally used 2 different shades of blue, so that might throw you off a bit. And for number 2 option, my art for Armor Tough wasn't big enough to actually go on the card, so I just looped it. So that's why you can see the top of his head and top of his sword at the bottom under the text box. But just imagine that it's a full art card. But yeah, these are the 2 current options. I'm deliberating. So just if you could let me know your thoughts, I would really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm just gonna keep on coloring more art, and I'm going to keep on balancing the cards, and then I'll hopefully come back to you with a potential how to play video. That'd be very exciting. And eventually, even just showing off the trial decks once they're finalized. That would be great. So yeah, thanks for watching, and till next time.